Welcome to TJ Mitchell Films, your one-stop shop for everything Jeep and off-road related content. And this is Garage Talk episode 2. And as you guys can see behind me, today on Garage Talk, we're talking about cutting. I got a bunch of different tools back here to cut a bunch of different types of material. I'm gonna break down the pros and cons of every tool, and at the end, I'm gonna show you which tool I would pick if I had to pick only one. So first up, we're starting big and we're gonna work our way down to some of the smaller equipment. So the biggest piece of equipment here is this do-all bandsaw. Now this thing is an absolute workhorse. Most of you guys probably, won't need or want a bandsaw of this size, but there might be a few of you out there that might be interested. And this is more like if you're doing some really serious heavy duty fabrication or like production style, cutting a lot of pieces of tube or some really thick channel, this is what you're gonna want, a big bandsaw like this. Now this thing is old and it is reliable. It can cut just about any material that you can fit in here, and we have cut some really big pieces of pipe in here before. And what's great about this is it has a coolant that can cool the blade, so depending on what type of material you're cutting, you can turn that on and that will help this blade last much longer with the coolant. It's got a reservoir underneath, super easy controls. Let's cut some aluminum channel so you guys can see this thing in action. This is aluminum in channel, so this is gonna cut super quick. We don't normally use coolant when we're cutting aluminum here, but so to break down the pros and cons of a machine like this, the cons would be one, that it's big, two, that it's expensive, but the pros are that you're gonna get very straight and consistent cuts on large pieces of material or large quantities of material. That's the big bandsaw. Next up, mini bandsaw. All right, so this bandsaw is maybe a little bit more practical for most people. Unlike the big bandsaw, this will run on 110 volts, just your normal, household plug there instead of 220. Also, it's a lot smaller and a lot more affordable, but you compromise on how big of a piece you can cut. But this is probably the more realistic approach. Similar operation to the other one, you're just gonna cut smaller material. This model of bandsaw does have a coolant reservoir and pump. Next up are chop saws. These are super affordable. They don't take up too much space. However, it's harder to cut longer pieces of material, like 10, 20-foot pieces, because you have to have stands or something set up to, support the ends when they're hanging way out there. And this guy is just a chop saw for cutting traditional wood with a wood blade on here. But what a lot of people don't know is that aluminum is so soft that you can cut this aluminum, and it'll be way better and more efficient than if you use a traditional chop saw blade. This is actually gonna melt the material and not really cut aluminum. This is the best way to do it. And you can also use just like a hand skill saw, as long as you have the same wooden blade. And on this model, it has the laser, which makes it even nicer. So show you how quick this really cuts. And that is some 1-inch, 120 wall square tube. So not super thin. And that cut pretty quick and efficient. And you can cut angles, you can do a number of things with this. Also, these are much louder than some of the other options. I didn't touch on that right away, but hearing protection, and with the traditional chop saw, it's gonna create a lot of sparks. So if you're in like a really nice garage, you're probably gonna wanna take this outside to cut your material, because you're gonna be shooting sparks all over the place. A very efficient way to cut material, but as you'll notice, like on your material, it leaves a lot of slag. It's not really slag, but melted material that you have to end up grinding off later. So it's definitely really nice to have one of each, depending on your projects that you're doing, but most people aren't doing a lot of aluminum, so you probably won't have that standard wood saw anyways. And this is probably the chop saw that you'll end up going with. This is a 14-inch blade, and you can cut a lot of stuff, but same thing, you're gonna be a little limited. If you go to cut something really big, you're only gonna be able to fit, as wide as the jaws are. And and potentially with how big the blade is as well. So you're limited there, but for a lot of home garage guys, chop saw's perfect. I touched on this earlier, but there's also the skill saw, just a handheld version, wood or aluminum only, obviously, but just want to demonstrate how easy it is to cut some more 1-inch 120 wall aluminum tube with it. Next up, this is what they call a nibbler, and this is for cutting sheet metal. And if you watched my Samurai project, to cut the wheel wells out of that 12 gauge or 14 gauge, I think it was 14 gauge mild steel, I used the nibbler. And these are a little bit more on the expensive side, but if you're doing a lot of sheet metal, you'll see why they're valuable. So as you can see, you can do like a lot of curved cuts with the sheet metal here. The only con with this is, since it like nibbles out little pieces, this does end up being like fairly sharp. So you have to come back and grind that smooth. But it's just sort of a cool little tool that it's just nice to have. And depending on which model you get, you could cut some pretty thick sheet metal. So the nibbler. Next up is a 4.5-inch grinder. Now, you can get these corded for really cheap, or you can upgrade to like, you know, a more expensive battery operated version like this, which is really nice to not have the cord. But so you can go cheap, you can go a little bit expensive, but these are extremely versatile. You can cut almost just about anything with this. Like I said, you probably wouldn't want to use a cutoff wheel to cut aluminum, but if you're doing steel or anything else like that, if you have this, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, you can cut just about anything. Even if you have to make a bunch of multiple cuts, you can cut 1/2-inch plate. You can cut anything with this. Always use the guards on these guys. Don't be that guy, just you think you're so much better than the tool or you're smarter than it. It only takes you not paying attention for 1/2 a second for you to tweak that blade, and then that thing blows up on you and you're getting hurt, or somebody else around you is getting hurt. So keep that in mind. But we're just gonna cut some of that 1.5-inch square tube with this guy, and I'll show you how you can just flip the tube around. If you have to cut a bigger piece of tube, still cut it with just a grinder. Well, as you can see there, I didn't really make the straightest cut, but that gets the point across. Yeah, so you can cut, the other thing is like you can cut any angle out of these. You mark it out just with a Sharpie or with like a soapstone or something. And you can cut anything at any angle, almost any material, for a very reasonable price. All right, so the last two on the list are probably the most fun to cut with. As you can tell, you need a little bit of proper protection. We have OxyAcetylene torch and the plasma cutter. And I love cutting with these, super fun. The pros and cons of each are, I think the plasma is a little bit more expensive and you need an air compressor, but it cuts pretty clean and pretty quick. I prefer the plasma. However, don't underestimate an OxyAcetylene torch. If you have it properly set up and you're properly skilled, or take your time, you can make some really clean cuts with OxyAcetylene. What we're gonna be doing here is cutting some 1/4-inch diamond plate. We're gonna do it first with the OxyAcetylene setup. We're gonna fire that up, cut a piece off that, and then we'll come back with the plasma. And we're gonna try first, we're gonna run it on just 120 volts. This plasma cutter can run on 110 or 220. So I'm gonna show you that if you have 110, you can still cut 1/4-inch plate. All right, next up, plasma cutter. So there you go. You can see the OxyAcetylene versus the plasma cut right here. So if you don't have 220 in your garage, just know that with the plasma cutter, still in the 110 power, you can still cut up to 1/4-inch plate. So yeah, those are the fun toys. All right, and that is gonna do it for Garage Talk episode 2, where we talked about cutting. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said that at the end I would reveal if I had to pick just one way of cutting, what I would pick, and it might be a little surprising to you guys, but if I had to only pick one, it would definitely just be a 4.5-inch grinder, just because of the versatility. It's not always the best to cut a lot of things, but you could cut pretty much anything with it, and it's extremely affordable. If you had only a bandsaw, you'd have a rough time doing some projects because you can't cut everything on a bandsaw. At the end of the day, there's a best tool for each scenario and price point. So hopefully I gave you guys just a good overview of the different ways to cut things. Maybe you didn't even know that you could cut aluminum with a skill saw, stuff like that. So if you're new to fabricating or building your own stuff, hopefully this video helped you out. As always, make sure you get on there and hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell while you're there as well. And also, if you're interested in any products or recommendations for any tools, I will have links below to my Amazon store, which will have links to tools, or just some other brands that I recommend down below. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.